The time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. We must say, wake up, America, wake up, for we cannot stop, and we will not and cannot be patient.
Just going to go through briefly again is one of our alums will present the survey that was done. That was the basis for some of the readings you'll hear later. We will be hearing from Dr. Jordan Nowotny of Fairleigh Dickinson and Dr. Jason Williams of Montclair State. Interspersed with their readings, you'll be hearing the alumni speakers, the RiverDell alumni, speaking either their own words or the words of other students who chose for whatever reason to not read them, as well as hearing about a petition. And so on that note, our first alumni speaker is Isabella Gladston. She's a 2017 RiverDell alum, and she's a rising senior at James Madison University.
Hi everyone, my name is Isabella. I just wanted to start off by saying that a couple months ago, I'd posted an Instagram about just some of the ways that I felt like there was discrimination at RiverDell, like some prejudice I felt personally. So I didn't want to talk too much personally about what happened to me at RiverDell, but what I wanted to talk about was the amount of responses I got from other graduates from that post. So after I posted that, I was flooded with DMs, text messages, comments on the post about things like I went through the same exact thing or I feel the same exact way. It was so many like responses that I felt like I couldn't just sit there and kind of listen to everyone talk about this without doing something. So like Nicole said, we decided to get together and kind of brainstorm different ideas about what we could do to positively impact these kids. Because I don't know, I don't think that some of these teenagers in high school are inherently like evil or racist, but I think that they could use some serious education on the matter. And I do know that for some particular people, it does come from home, because I've also heard parents, adults, use derogatory language, discriminatory behavior. I've seen it. So it doesn't surprise me to see that their kids have been doing the same thing. So I think what we're trying to do is just have a place at RiverDell where we can either unlearn or learn new behaviors, because I mean, this isn't something that just, it's like, oh, they're just being immature or whatever, because it affects people. It affected me. Like it affects your personality. It affects the way that you want to express where you came from. So I think we must implement this kind of education at RiverDell. And I'd like to add that this isn't a right or a left argument. It's just an argument to protect the kids of color at RiverDell, because this matter of ending racism has affected the self-esteem, the self-worth, and authenticity of these students. So, like Nicole said, we sent out a survey asking if you've experienced any kind of racism at RiverDell, and has it, gone up in the last 4 years? What kinds of behavior was it? Have you seen any police? Have you seen any like police violence in the neighborhood or any racism within police? Those kinds of questions. We got around a little bit over 40 responses because we sent it within smaller groups from person to person. We then took that information, and then I compiled all of the responses I got on my Instagram post. We sent that into RiverDell administration, and we requested to have a meeting with them. So then we did end up meeting with the superintendent, and we thought it had gone well. We thought that it was like a very, thoughtful meeting. We were under the impression that we came up with 3 goals. One of them was a professional development day for teachers to learn how to teach kids about racism, which we had like teachers at RiverDell say like, oh, I'd want to do that. Our second was like a club for diversity to make these students feel, more comfortable in their own skin. And then, so the third was we wanted the superintendent to send out these resources where parents, teachers, students could learn about, different books written by Black authors, different podcasts to listen to, different documentaries to listen to educate yourself on what people go through on a daily basis. So we came with these 3 clear short-term goals. We were under the impression that that he would have presented that at the board meeting, which didn't happen. So we think maybe the next one we will end up hearing about it. And if not, if he won't present it, then we'll present it. So that's where we are with that. So a solution they did offer at the board meeting was it's on page 10 of the reopening plan. So it was kind of like centered around, every club is now going to be centered around some kind of citizenship approach where we're supposed to be encouraged to talk about things like the pandemic or situations of unrest, is the exact quotes on page 10, which didn't directly mention racism. So that's all I have to say. So our next speaker is Jordan Nowotny. He is an assistant professor in the Criminology and Criminal Justice Department at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and he teaches courses on restorative justice, post-conflict, transitional justice, and policing. His research focuses on state crime, international justice, reform initiatives, and wrongful conviction. In addition to his role at FDU, Jordan is an advisory board member at the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education, the College of St. Elizabeth, editorial board member for Contemporary Justice Review, and consults on human rights education. His work has been published in a variety of academic journals, including Conflict Resolution Quarterly, Contemporary Justice Review, and Sexuality and Culture. His most recent project centers on exonerate re-entry barriers after prison.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? So just a quick thing. I had a bit of an emergency this morning with my daughter. I'm waiting outside of a medical facility, so it's a little bit loud here. So if anyone has any questions afterward, please make sure that you can send it to my email. Also, my email is nowotny, that's my last name, at fdu.edu. And I might have to log off sometime after that if they call me in. So just let you know. My talk today is about, I was thinking about what to speak about for this event, and I want to talk about investment in whiteness and really try to outline how I understand structural racism, at least the best way that I can. So I want to begin the conversation with a metaphor. If we were to imagine an American institution, say schools, as a ship, we might think of the principal or your teacher or your child's teacher as the ship's captain. We think of that ship and the people on it in isolation, removed of context. We might also imagine that the captain is in charge of where the ship goes, how fast it gets to its destination, and in what shape it arrives at safe harbor. This is a pleasant image in the American psyche. It fits our American dream, our image of self-determinism, the mentality that if we just work hard enough, have the right skills, we can do anything. Sometimes I also want to believe in this illusion. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel like the things that I've accomplished are based off only my own merit. The true master of the ship, however, is the ocean, the water, the context. A ship's arrival depends on the whims of the sea. American institutions like schools have to be understood with context included. You cannot understand the ship without understanding the ocean. A look through history shows that part of the American context is filled with white supremacy and continues to be filled by white supremacy. Many of us don't see, either because we are ignorant or because we willfully ignore it. I argue here that it's because we willfully ignore it. All the clues are there. The context stretches out before us like an ocean. When I was in graduate school, I taught a statistics course. It's not the most popular class for students, but I did okay. It was successful. I was well-liked. I even won a graduate teaching award. Right around 2009, I had an extremely bright student in the class, and she passed with the highest grade. And she later on entered into the doctoral program at UIC. I was in inner city Chicago at the public university there for my doctoral program. She became my colleague, and shortly thereafter, I defended my dissertation proposal and then started to plan my own research project to eventually graduate. I passed off all of my items to the student because I had suggested to the department that she should teach the class going forward. She was exceptional. Everyone agreed that she would be a really good addition to the teaching staff at UIC. So she received my lectures, my notes, my material, my PowerPoints, my assignments, everything. And she started teaching that fall. That semester, I made two ignorant assumptions. I first assumed that students enjoyed my class because of what I produced. The material that I produced, I assumed that it was because it was interesting, that it was well constructed, and a product of my own labor and skills as a teacher. And I assumed also that by passing on this material, that my former student would be equally as successful in the class. I assumed that, like me, she would just show up, show the PowerPoint slides, go through the mathematical formulas, and everything would work. I knew that, of course, like all teaching, that there would be bumps along the road, but I figured that was the learning process. She made it 4 weeks in the class. The students rebelled. They called the dean, they wrote letters to the president. They said that they couldn't understand what she was saying. They claimed that she didn't know what she was talking about, that she was unfair. All of this was using the same quizzes, the same PowerPoint slides, the same material that I had used, that I had never been judged on. She was quickly replaced by another faculty member and assigned as a teaching assistant to a different class. So my colleague, that person that was removed, that used the same material as that I had, with a much different outcome, was young, Black, and a woman. We shared an office, so I knew how much she had prepared for that course. I knew that every time she went to class, she had dressed professionally, all her slides were in order. She was much more prepared than I ever was. I taught in flannel, in shorts, sometimes a t-shirt. And at the time, I thought that I was being cool and approachable. And a lot of students actually received me in that way. We actually have statistical studies to show that male instructors that act informally in class are viewed much more positively, for example, than women. You know, I did know that at that time I had to put on some kind of production of self. I was young, so I kind of grew my beard out, my facial hair, because I wanted to act like I was older. And I thought that that was enough, and it was enough. When I arrived in the first day of class, I just started teaching, and each student accepted what I had to say, that I belonged in front of them, that I was an expert. Students took notes. They never challenged material. They never complained about their about my quizzes. They might have complained about the class in general, but they didn't blame me. I met their expectations of what professors look like. I never had to prove that I belonged in front of them. Most students called me professor, or even though I had a few semesters left to finish, I never even corrected them. To this day, I've never had to prove that I belonged in front of people. Being born and raised, looking a certain way and speaking a certain way was enough. And in those moments, I always wanted to believe, and sometimes I still want to believe, that everything I do is earned. This, to me, is the ship without the ocean. A couple of years ago, I attended a community forum in the town that I live. It was about racism and police violence. It was, I think, right after Ferguson. And some scholars and experts spoke for the first hour, and then we broke off into smaller group discussions. Everyone that was there was kind of the choir. They all believed in things like equality, human rights, making things better. And when we broke into smaller groups, I remember going around the circle and everyone pledged that they were going to start to speak to their neighbors and their family members about things like white privilege and implicit bias. But one of the assumptions that is made often is that simply by making people aware, racism can somehow be combated. And the purpose of my talk today is to suggest that this is not what's going to happen. My understanding of whiteness is defined broadly. It's not just the veneer of our skin tone. Whiteness has a history, a culture. It's part of sports and religion, music and language. When you read a history book, you're reading about the history of whiteness, created from a specific vantage point and promoting specific objectives. In many ways, whiteness is part of the frame in which all aspects of American life are anchored. Institutions, organizations, even people were created or born attached to this framework, and they have become invested in its structure, whether they know it or not. To be critical of the importance we have given to whiteness is to question the structure itself and all the institutions that were built on this structure. Our criminal justice system, our schools, our families, organized religion, even healthcare. As a criminologist, maybe it's best to illustrate some examples of this investment through our own justice system. Some of you may have read, or hopefully will read, Michelle Alexander's new Jim Crow, or seen the documentary The 13th. Maybe you've learned from your parents about the relationship between the police and labor control. Although slavery was abolished in 1865, forced work and exploitation of Black bodies for profit continued through Jim Crow America. In the mid-20th century, despite new freedoms won by civil rights activists, structure and economy demanded an exploited class, and the war on drugs was just a code for a war on Black people. Especially young Black men portrayed as irreparable and dangerous. These images, as you see in your news, persevere today and enable our society to tolerate private prisons, prison work groups, police shootings. Unsurprisingly, the classification of certain people as dangerous has been useful for politicians, leaders of commerce, and others to generate political and social change in their own image. These tactics are at play right now. As a kid, I lived outside Detroit. My mom and dad, and I hesitate to talk about this section, but I think to be honest, I have to. My mom and dad were loyal union automotive workers, and they were working class. And they taught me that, explicitly taught me that all people were equal, and in many ways, they're exceptional parents. But they also taught me some things that I'm less proud of. They taught me that Detroit was a dangerous place. When we drove through it, my parents always had us lock all the doors and roll up the windows. They told us that they sped through these neighborhoods. Young people are smart. They connect the dots. In the 1990s, I learned that there were dangerous people, that they lived in Detroit and that they were Black. My mom and dad never meant to teach me those things. Like most parents, they only wanted to protect me. But in doing so, they helped maintain a culture of anti-Blackness and indirect normalization of whiteness. I have to admit that the most important thing I've learned since leaving that place is to unlearn the majority of things I had learned in elementary school, middle school, and high school. Around 2007, 2008, I was in Chicago and started my doctoral program, as I mentioned before. And I was hired as a research assistant for a project studying police. And in this project, I wrote along with officers. I started off in the police training academy and followed those officers. Then I actually rode along with them on their patrols in the city. In those days, the superintendent was a man named Phil Klein. He declared that his mission was to stop gangs, guns, and drugs. At the surface level, this sounds like a noble mission. In trying to accomplish this, he used zero-tolerance policies and saturation patrols in areas that were defined as hot spots of crime. I noticed right away that all of these areas were Black and Latin American neighborhoods. I recognized that some of the officers before from the training academy, I knew that going in, they were good officers. I felt like they were good officers. But in Chicago in those days, when you graduate from the police department, the police training academy, to prove yourself as a street warrior, you're sent to the highest crime areas in the city. Your directive is to arrest and stop anyone that is suspected that is up to no good or engaged in crime. I saw young men and women that started off actually wanting to help people. They started off eager, energetic, hopeful. After a year or two of zero-tolerance policing and protecting good society from their urban enemies, all they saw were enemies in those neighborhoods. I guess this is all to say that when I hear people state that to stop racism, all we have to do is get rid of the bad apples, I feel a little bit queasy. We can't get rid of bad apples. We build bad apples. We build them. We train them. And it doesn't take much. Our institutions, our culture are saturated with racism and fear. The structure, the sea itself, is rooted in inequality. Even with, if you think about the coronavirus, and you think about which communities it affects most, we build our infrastructure, the economy, on the backs of poor people, of people of color. Due to where they live, what jobs they have, who is deemed to be essential, we disproportionately force individuals to be exposed to this virus. I could provide dozens of examples, lots of them in criminal justice, but I don't think that it's necessary. We have to understand what's ahead. Change will take more than awareness. The culture and structure have to shift. Using fear as a weapon for political gain, casting people as enemies within our own communities, this all has to end, and it won't stop on its own. It won't stop with just awareness. I think that young people and some of us older people that are involved in public demonstrations, doing the work that all of you are doing in social justice advocacy, the marches and the protests that are currently happening around the country, I think that these individuals are all aware of this context. They can see the context, they can see the ocean. Real change will require sacrifice, hard work and a changing of this current cultural and structural paradigm. From what the students that are on this call have already done in school, I can tell that you are all prepared. Although my message is overwhelmingly, I think, a little bit darker and oppressive, I think that what I want everyone to come away with is that it's going to take more than these individual changes. It has to be a structural change that happens in the United States. And I think, unlike any time that I've been alive, I'm cautiously hopeful for a better future given what's happening right now. And I think that I'll end there. Thank you so much. I want to introduce next Daniela Zambrano. She is a 2016 RD alum who just graduated from LaSalle University. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, I'm Daniela. I'm going to be reading the experience of a 2019 RiverDell alum. I was discriminated because I am Ashkenaze Jew and half Black. None of my instances involving my teachers, but it did involve the students. Just a reminder, there was a senior who just graduated that decided it was funny to draw a swastika in the boys' bathroom a couple years ago. The administration gave him a slap on the hand and moved on. No one found the culprit who wrote, "Kill all the Jews," in the girls' bathroom. I don't have the pictures, but I remember seeing the wall and being scared. Homophobic slurs and comments about specific teachers and other LGBTQ students. I don't know if you know this, but no RD LGBT student can safely come out. I find these things absolutely unacceptable and revolting and make me embarrassed to be an RD hawk. Another mention. Almost every white student uses the N-word, especially while singing songs at house parties and school dances. Being half Black with Black curly hair, of course I'm going to experience racism. Too many instances and too many details, but I've learned how to handle it properly now that I'm older. At football games at RD, and especially around the time when Colin Kaepernick knelt during the national anthem, we played against schools that were predominantly Black. Football players knelt and did what most RD students shout: "You have no rights, stand up," N-words, calling a Black student monkey. That was 2019 for you. Racism has increased in the past few years at a rapid rate, thank you to our current president. Next speaker that I'm going to introduce is Talia Louda, who is a 2017 RD alum and rising senior at Ithaca College.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to read some thoughts that I had while filling out the survey that Isabella and Nicole had mentioned before. First of all, as someone who identifies as Jewish, I can recall countless times in my religion being berated and turned into a joke. People would walk up to me, address me as Jew, tell me to get into the oven, and have asked for the number on my arm. As the years went on, I myself would join into the jokes and humiliation because I was uncomfortable and didn't know how to take a stand against it, considering I was outnumbered, and pretty much everyone made me feel as if being Jewish was funny. In addition to anti-Semitism, racism towards people of color is very much a rampant issue in our community. One specific male teacher, a business teacher, was the worst offender, perpetuating various microaggressions, harassing me and other students about political views, and encouraging students to make fun of marginalized folks. Sometimes I even heard him use a derogatory term casually in a sentence. It took the administration years to take action and terminate his employment. Instances such as these were common at RiverDell, and in my opinion have created a culture in which racism, discrimination, and hate speech are often overlooked and regarded as a joke, significantly downplaying how harmful this behavior can be. To name a few, there have been various occurrences taking place on the night before Halloween in which swastikas were painted on garbage cans and sidewalks. Meanwhile, the town seemed to not take much action. I've also heard with my own ears at parties many white students using the N-word while describing Black Americans, making racist jokes towards Asian folks, and using stereotypically damaging language aimed at Latinx people. This was all greatly heightened around the time of the 2016 election. Another example is during my senior year at RDHS when one of the bathrooms was vandalized with swastikas. Not only did the school administration sweep this under the rug by not even sending out an email, but also I believe that student went on to graduate from the school. The swastika is not only a symbol of hate for the Jewish community, but also to essentially every other minority, as the Holocaust did not discriminate. Frankly, it is disturbing for the school administration to isolate every single one of their students who belongs to a marginalized community. The lack of public action and condemnation from the school has maintained the ability for the community to go on as if this wasn't a blatant violation of human decency. So our next speaker is Dr. Jason Williams. He is a passionate activist, criminologist, deeply concerned about racial disparity and mistreatment within the criminal justice system. Dr. Williams is a New Jersey native, raised by his grandmother in a housing project, which ultimately led him to pursue a doctorate in the administration of justice from Texas Southern University. Aside from publishing in the academic arena, his perspectives are also posted on several public outlets, including the Hampton Institution and Truth Out. He has conducted ethnographic research in Baltimore, Maryland, and Ferguson, Missouri, following the police-involved tragedies of Freddie Gray and Michael Brown. He has also engaged research around returning citizens and how they navigate re-entry and the prison. He is mostly concerned about the punitive effects the criminal justice system imposes upon marginalized populations. Dr. Williams has been invited to Old Dominion University, Yale University, and other institutions to lecture on some of the topics mentioned above. He's also deeply entrenched in the community work as he serves on the board of 2 major organizations in New Jersey and actively works with others for a change in the administration of justice. So thank you and welcome, Dr. Williams.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Karen and all the other organizers and especially the students for being here. I greatly appreciate the invitation. And I really hope that, this gathering can cultivate the much needed activism, right, and sustain change for the area. I really hope so. So I'll start off by saying that we are at an intersection of great tragedy, great tragedy, because tragedy is happening all around the country. And sometimes we sit in our own locales and we look outward and we think, not here, right, not here. A person, of course, did not get shot in Riverdale, right? But nonetheless, we do have tragedy here, right? We do have tragedy here. But we're thinking about tragedy, or at least I'm speaking about it. We have much of it happening within broader society by way of racism, and all kinds of racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism and such, but also by way of various other social impediments wrought upon us under the auspices of the COVID-19 tragedy, right? Which of course has laid bare the broken infrastructure of our healthcare system and the many reforms that we need there, right, as Jordan has articulated. And so we have this sort of building up of multiple tragedies that is bringing about this sort of multi-dimensional aspect of suffering. And you want to think about how that reverberates and how that might also show up on the doorstep of our schools this fall. But we also see the sort of weaknesses of our economic structure as scores of our citizens, our neighbors, will now go without the extensions of unemployment, right? This is also a new development that has just happened since a few hours ago. Congresspersons are leaving DC and sitting home comfortably, right? As opposed to getting the job done to save some of us from this economic nightmare. But nevertheless, when you look back at our school system, there's some sort of precariousness sitting there as well, right? For many of us who are educators, but also for our students. And we're talking about K through 12 and onward, colleges as well. We haven't a clue of what will come once the fall semester begins. But then also what kind of new preventable catastrophes will also arrive, right? Preventable catastrophes, much like that which, our student participants have just articulated in their presentations, because much of these things are preventable, but then also how these preventable catastrophes will exacerbate already existing catastrophes, right? But then ultimately too, what role, if any, will police officers play in controlling these social volcanic eruptions? Because that's what they are in many regards, social volcanic eruptions. And so taken all together, all that which I've mentioned, I guess what I want to talk about is how this creates a kind of peculiar social control mechanism by which all of us are meant to live. And for the purposes of the talk here, we will think about the school as a social control mechanism. When we think about social control, we think traditionally about like policing and out in the main streets or in the community, but what about the school as a hub of social control, as a hub of, socialization, if you will? It is important that we realize how schools also contribute to the cyclical nature of injustice, right? The cyclical nature of injustice. And for instance, we have, the school to prison pipeline crisis, right? Which, for instance, it's a process where juveniles are largely taken from public schools, although it does happen in private schools as well, but largely taken from public schools and basically cycled into juvenile and criminal justice systems. And the racial disparities here are through the roof, right? In terms of who's more likely to be tagged as problem students and disciplined into these systems. Some youth are finding that their first charge, right? First criminal charge is coming through way of schools. But I should state too that the feeling of having been tagged delinquent or criminal doesn't always have to end or start with an official from within the official system, right? From an officer or a prosecutor or an intake officer, which is the terminology used in the juvenile justice system. For instance, you can simply be tagged by a teacher or by a principal, right? And still walk away with the same feeling as the first speaker said, of a sort of low self-worth, right? Low self-esteem and such. You can walk away with the same feeling of having been adjudicated through the juvenile justice system, right? And so it's important that we begin to kind of contextualize schools as hubs of immense social consequence, and particularly around these experiences of racism, right, anti-Semitism, and so forth and so on, within school systems where action is not being taken seriously. In the case of RiverDell, there are instances in which students are alleging outright abandonment of their protectors or teachers or administrators. There are instances in which blatant racism is witnessed or alleged. Right? And so when we go back to my construction of social control within this setting, I would again encourage you to think about, well, what kind of students are we looking to create? What does this do to the psychosocial context of many of the students whom, one, are the target of said symbolism and bullying, right? And then two, who are the audience of said symbolism and targeting and bullying and such? What does this do to the psychology of these students, and many of whom are still developing, right? Are still developing. And then to know that administrators or teachers are not doing anything to effectuate change on their behalf. Immense social consequence, right? The school as a site of immense social consequence. And I would further say this is unacceptable. It cannot be tolerated moving forward. And this is why this meeting is incredible. It is much needed. The toleration of racism, phobias, and etc., it leads to a kind of peculiar social control that almost always guarantees the annihilation of education for those whom are the target, but likewise also the annihilation of education for those who are ushering out the bullying. Right? Because these could be rather used as moments in which to teach individuals that, it's not right to do X, Y, and Z. Right? It's not right to do X, Y, and Z. But I say this to say that outside the obvious effects of defilement, there are also discursive or hidden effects to such bullying, the unintended consequences, if you will, which can lead to people dropping out. Right? Dropping out, physically leaving school, or perhaps even staying in school, but mentally, right, and sort of psychosocially being completely gone. So my body is present, but my mind completely out. And so this also results in another kind of social controlling, if you will, of students being labeled, special needs or sent to resource classes and such. We need to think about how, special needs and resource classes and such, right, being tagged and labeled under the child study team, it can also be socially constructed in this context. But anywho, the effects to such bullying with the unintended consequence, right, can also lead to violence, so bringing weapons to school, or also one becoming dependent upon drugs and such. So we must build capacity, and research supports some of these things, by the way, but we must build capacity to care about these students, because their lives matter as well. And so does their education. So does their education. They have a right to come to school and be treated equally, right? And so we must demand that educators and especially our administrators take heed to this. We mustn't deny a child their right to an education by remaining silent about the violence that they are experiencing within the school system. And sometimes we might look at these symbolism, you know, if it was drawn on the wall, or well, you know, that's just something that someone painted on the wall. It's not really a form of violence, right? But it is still a form of violence if the student can no longer go back to the classroom and sit and focus. It is still a form of violence, and we must contextualize it as that. Meanwhile, if one looks at education stats from the Department of Education, you know, you can look at who is more likely to graduate and who isn't. Oftentimes, the target of said bullying are minoritized students. Why is this the case? You know, the nuances behind minoritized students in particular dropping out are rarely ever explored within most of these quantitative printouts. You know, because in America, we tend to look at mostly the numbers. We don't really break down the sort of qualitative effects. Monique Scott, I think, has written a tremendously good book where she looks at, you know, African-American girls being pushed out of the school system. And again, she, in her book, she explores the many, many nuances and interventions that we spoke about already here. And I know we will hear about some more as the program go on. But how many of our children are literally pushed out as opposed to wantonly leaving the school? You know, and to what extent does, you know, the lack of intervention on behalf of teachers and administrators may have played a role? You know, could this student been the next biophysicist? Could they have been the next power attorney? Could they have been the next mayor? Could they have been our next teacher in that very school? Right? We have to begin to see these students as the next one who's going to take over the throne. That's how we have to begin to contextualize these students. But if these attacks are occurring wholesale against minoritized students in particular, right, then we must also know that the impact is going to hurt more, especially when these groups already lack capacity in these areas of success. So when you think about, you know, graduation rates and such, you know, and having said all of this, I would encourage us to think deeply at how we might contextualize social control, because I've always looked at the school as a site of immense social consequence, certainly for its social control, right? Its social control apparatuses. And I say that in a variety of contexts, because you have social control in the hallway, you have it in the classroom setting, but also in the curriculum, the kinds of books that you're reading. I can say go, you know, K through 12, I don't remember reading too much about African-American history, which probably leads to a lot of the bullying and a lot of the racial epithets, right? Social control has the role in diversity and inclusion. Who are your principals? Who are your teachers? Who are your counselors? Can they relate socially and politically to the students who are enrolled here? So we need to recontextualize social control, because it is beyond just that of traditional law enforcement. And in many ways, it can be even more egregious, right? Because the effect in many ways tends to be a little bit more sort of psychological, right? As opposed to immediate and physical. But I will also say, with regards to this kinds of social control, right? It is also us. It is how we interact with one another. It is in the words that we say to one another. It is in the symbols, right? It is in the symbols that we draw, the symbols that we use. And more important, it shows in how we stand up for others during moments when it absolutely matters, right? During the moments when it absolutely matters. And remember, you know, we are one nation. So when the dreams of one child is diminished, right, it pushes the entire nation back. Because like I said, this child could have been the next president, right, or the next scientist. So we must create schools that are going to be free from the rotten influence of racism and all other phobias, you know, as these impediments play the absolutely same role as witnessed in greater society. You know, you kind of have to see the school as a petri dish, you know, a petri dish of undeterred sort of typical social processes left to their own devices. And the reason why I say it that way is because when we think about schools, we sort of see them as, oh, well, our children are going to be okay over there. There's nothing to worry about, right? Those are professionals that are going to make sure our kids are well taken care of. But no, the school is a petri dish of already existing discourses that are happening out here. And you kind of just can't expect the school to do everything that you sometimes at home, the parents, right, or us out here, society should be doing anyway. Because that's unfortunately what we're learning here in Riverdale, right, is that all of the ugliness outside has made its way inside, right, into a space in which children are supposed to feel safe, into a space in which children are supposed to be learning and receiving an equal opportunity to do so. And not to be blocked in deeply painful psychological ways, you know, towards getting an education. And so we have to build capacity. And like I said, building capacity should come through the intentional diversity and inclusion discourses, intentional. This can be done through curriculum. I know a lot of school systems have been sort of delving into those discourses around curricular changes, taking this out and putting that in. You know, learning more about Native American histories, you know, Asian American experience, you know, delving more into that so that students are very well aware of the influences of other cultures and not just the sort of white American experience. But then also in whom you are hiring. It's very important that students understand that authority figures can also be folks who do not look like them. Because if I learn to respect Dr. Williams, or, you know, if I was teaching in Riverdale who looks like this with locks and so forth and so on, then I can see my peer over there as human as well, right? I can see her or him as a human as well. That is crucial. Our schools are places of the sort of first site of socialization for our children. And this starts at pre-K for some of us, right? So it is a major site of social consequence. A major site of social consequence. And to that end, before I end, we mustn't be afraid to be race conscious about how we approach the construction of the school, right? Because I think in this conversation, we're talking about the reconstitution of the school as we know it, frankly, right? The reconstitution of the school as we know it, such that everyone who must attend can feel as if they see themselves in that space. But we must become race conscious. And the reason why I say that is because in everyday life, we don't materialize in race neutral ways. You know, when I walk outside, I know I am a Black man and others know that too, right? So we don't materialize in race neutral ways. And so therefore, when reconstituting the school, we must materialize in the same way in which we do in everyday ordinary life. The American experiment, for instance, go to any of our founding documents, is supposed to be about difference. It's supposed to be about respecting the personhood of others. You know, if I'm from the Latinx community, I should be able to maintain my cultural reality and individuality, right? I should be able to speak whatever language that I want, right? In America. You know, and so I should not be forced to essentially erase who I am and my own individuality in order to, quote, fit in, right? That should not be the American experiment. And so I think we need to really interrogate diversity, because that's what the American experiment is about. And we need to remember that, you know, the school is the site at which the American experiment is most cultivated and socialized. It is within the school. It is within the school. So we can decide how safe and how powerful and how inclusive we want our schools to be. It's literally up to us. And, you know, this, I think, is the message that moving forward, we really have to take to administrators, we really have to take to teachers, and more importantly, to board members, because the literal lives of our children depends on that. And let me tell you, you know, we tend to, like I said, you tend to contextualize violence in the form of, well, the kid was shot, right? And so I can see that he was hurt, and I know that he's hurt because I can see the pain physically on his body. But understand, there are children who may have graduated from this school who, for all intent and purposes, are socially and civilly gone, okay? So yes, I may have graduated from RiverDell, but my spirit has been killed having gone through RiverDell, having gone through that school. Okay? So we need to think about that. Because again, literal lives, minds and bodies depends on the entire changing of that culture. So thank you so very much for the invitation. So very much. And now I need to introduce my next speaker. This is Samantha Zambrano. She is a 2017 RiverDell alum and is currently enrolled at Bergen Community College. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, and thank you for coming, everyone. I'm going to be relaying the experience of a RiverDell 17 alum who is an Asian American woman who submitted this anonymously. I have definitely witnessed anti-Semitism, homophobia, sexism, and xenophobia. There were constantly jokes and derogatory comments made about Jewish people and making fun of people simply because they are Jewish, and subsequently making comments about associated stereotypes. And I constantly heard comments supporting Hitler and thanking the Holocaust throughout my 4 years at RiverDell. As for homophobia, there were many individuals that publicly didn't support gay rights and used the F word in their daily vocabulary and made negative comments about the LGBTQ+ community, or saying that there were only two genders and discrediting the other genders. There were so many awful comments that I heard targeted towards gay people. As for sexism, many male students often made derogatory comments towards females and would try to invalidate the women's rights movement and what it stands for and fights for. I heard males discrediting the idea of female rape victims. During the time of the Trump election in 2016, I witnessed so many awful comments being made about women in support of Trump and his past of numerous sexual assaults and foul sexist language. As for xenophobia, during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, I witnessed numerous comments made on social media by former RiverDell students generalizing the entire Asian race and showing how disgusting Asians were and to stay away from them or else you'd catch the coronavirus. I also saw former students emphasizing and supporting Trump's usage of the term Chinese virus. Also, specifically during my time at RiverDell, I witnessed the negative attitudes from white students towards the foreign Asian students from Korea. Within my time at RiverDell, I was called different offensive slurs against Asian people, and derogatory comments, hidden as jokes, were made towards me based on my race, such as, "Go back to the rice fields," or comments about my abilities with math and driving, or that I eat dogs. I also witnessed the daily usage of the N-word spoken by non-Black people. I heard countless jokes made about people of color, whether about specific individuals or just races in general, and witnessed individuals do incredibly racist impressions. The next person who will be speaking will be Felicita Kostionis. She's a 2019 RiverDell alum and a rising sophomore at Boston College, and she will be speaking David Ocampo's submission, who was a 2016 RiverDell alum.
Hi. So before I start, I'd really like to echo the words of Isabella and Dr. Williams in order to urge everyone here to challenge RiverDell. I think it's really important that we all reach out to Mr. Fletcher and the fellow board members, because the issues within the school are deep and they are real, as you have and will continue to hear. We need to put heavy pressure on RiverDell and Mr. Fletcher to make necessary changes, because without the pressure, RiverDell's issues will continue to be swept under the rug and normalized. School is meant to exist as a place for enrichment and growth, but without addressing the blatant racism, anti-Semitism, and other issues of prejudice, how is that possible? So now I'm going to read the words of David Ocampo, a 2016 RiverDell alumni. I was the first Mexican kid that many of my fellow classmates have ever met when my family moved to River Edge when I was 7 years old. My parents are both Mexican immigrants and have worked extremely hard to assimilate to American culture. That being said, I still had plenty of classmates ask throughout elementary school if I had jumped the border, if I was good at climbing fences, and questioning my legal status. By the time 6th grade came around, I was already dubbed the illegal Latino. And as a kid just trying and wanting to fit in, I kind of just had to roll with the punches. Once I got to middle and high school, the real mean comments started. I was called a beaner, a spick, and even illegal. I would get made fun of if my mom packed me Mexican food for lunch because it looked gross and weird. Kids would ask if I did cocaine, if I sold cocaine, or even if I had connections to the cartel. And then cops started to stop me when I would walk home from school, questioning where I lived and what I was doing. Department store employees would follow me around, presumably because they thought I was going to steal things. I once even had a cop frisk me during a traffic stop while I was on my way home from St. Peter's Church youth group. I've been living in a community where a compliment about my ethnicity sounds more like, "You're one of the good Mexicans Trump talks about," instead of something normal and something genuine. Once in high school at my job working at an Italian restaurant, one lady even said to me, "Oh, your English is so good, I can hardly even hear your accent." I was born in Teaneck, New Jersey. Despite the fact that there have been more families of color moving into the area, the community has done little, if anything, to educate themselves on Latin history or Black history, and they have only just recently started to address Asian American history and the prejudice that many Asians face for years from the government. I never learned about the Black Panthers, Malcolm X, Angela Davis, James Baldwin, Assata Shakur, Emilio Zapata, Benito Juarez, Frida Kahlo, or the countless other North American historical icons until I got to college and seeked out the information for myself. All that was taught about Native American villages and empires such as the Comanche, Aztecs, Mayas, Inuit, or Sioux was that they were primitive savages that were taken over by the more advanced societies of Western Europe. During my time at RiverDell, I felt that one of the best classes that was taught was super sociology with Mr. O'Toole, where we learned all about different social systems and the communities that keep certain social constructs alive so as not to deviate from the norm. It was my favorite class in all of high school, and having Mr. O'Toole as a professor played a big role in how engaged I was with it. Despite the fact that this was an extremely interesting class, every point Mr. O'Toole tried to make would quickly be met with a rebuttal from some student who would react in a way that seemed that they had just been personally attacked. While there was never any direct racist information taught in school, the lack of our own representation in the molding of American history makes those who aren't represented feel invisible. With this comes the assumption that Western societies have always been better, leading to internalized racism. When left unaddressed, this turns into the microaggressions and overt racism that tends to come out of fellow classmates with the comments such as, "You don't sound Latino, you're very articulate." So now I'd like to introduce Liz Halsall. She's a 2015 RiverDell alumni who graduated from Manhattan College last year.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Okay. I'm Elizabeth Halsall. I'm speaking on behalf of the RiverDell for Black Lives Matter Facebook and Instagram as one of their administrators. So myself and my friend Vanessa decided to begin the group after the murder of George Floyd. We both believed it was important for our community to acknowledge the injustice that had taken place and to continue having discussions within our two towns to make a more inclusive and tolerant place to live for everyone. So our ultimate goal has always been to change the school's curriculum. Currently, the Change.org petition that myself, Giselle Ocampo, and Ali Garcia has created has over 600 signatures and is still receiving support every single day, which is absolutely amazing. Our curriculum change would entail the inclusion of material by people of color like literature, art, music, theories, scientific theories, historical information, many other important contributions into our world. Like Dr. Williams said, it does not just come down to control in the halls. It comes down to what we teach in the classroom completely. That being said, we also believe that teaching anti-racism and teaching students to have an understanding of differences and embracing all cultures is absolutely so important. And not even just in high school, elementary school, middle school, every school system should have something in place where we teach our children to be tolerant. And that is just how we're going to become more diverse and more inclusive. So currently, our Instagram is collecting stories anonymously, non-anonymously, from students who have experienced racism, who have experienced or seen things that they don't believe is right and things that they think need to be called out. A lot of stuff like this goes ignored, goes under the table. Teachers look the other way, and it's just not acceptable anymore. And myself, I've seen so many things in my years at RiverDell and in middle school and even elementary schools that it's just unacceptable. It's just unacceptable behavior. And the more we call attention to it, the more we address it, and the more we say, hey, this is not right, the more conversations we'll be able to have. Unfortunately, we did send our petition and we did send our curriculum changes to the Board of Education and to the principal and the superintendents, and we haven't really received anything back yet. We're hoping to go into a Board of Ed meeting soon with our requests and see what they have to say with us being there. But we're hoping that our current students, our past students, teachers who are interested in seeing a real change in our schools, want to work together, create committees, do after school things, groups, keep the conversation going. Don't stop talking about this just because other things are going on. This needs to come from us. This is our way to say, hey, we need to make a difference. We need to do it because clearly our school is not going to do it without us standing up and saying something. So if you haven't already, please check out the Facebook, RiverDell for Black Lives Matter, our Instagram, RiverDell BLM. We're constantly posting updates, more information. Feel free to tell us something that you have to say. We're all ears. We want to hear your stories. We want to know. We want to gather as much as we can to present to our school board and really get them to listen to us. So that's all I have to say. This is great. So thank you, guys.
All right. So thank you to all of the wonderful speakers. This was really impactful so far. Just to put this in a context, I want to show you, this is some data from a non-representative sample, and I'm a researcher by background, so I understand what that means. But this was nearly 3,000 educators nationwide. The study was published in May 2019. As you can see, bias and hate occurs in all parts of the school community. 32% happens in the classroom, but even more, as we saw and heard about the swastika in the bathroom, in the hallways, right? The bathrooms, outside, and obviously in the community and on social media. Yes, it includes elementary school. 1 out of 5 incidents that the educators reported were in elementary schools, 27% in middle schools. But a lot of it, and I think you've heard that here, has been in the high schools. So we're living with this here in RiverDell, but this is not a new trend. About 60% of these incidents were racially motivated. There was religiously motivated incidents. I didn't show those slides, but anti-Muslim, anti-LGBTQ. So this goes on nationwide. But this is not new. This slide, if you couldn't tell, is from a typewriter. Some of you younger people may not recognize the font or know the word typewriter. But this is an order of service for a Jewish coming of age ceremony. What I think is important, though, this is from the South. I believe it's a synagogue from Chattanooga, Tennessee in 1954. For those of you who attended the vigil in Oradell a couple of months ago, Rabbi Jim Stoloff spoke. I went to a subsequent adult ed with him, and he showed this from his mother. Now, this is so you know that this has been recognized. This is not new. What Drs. Nowotny and Williams talked about, this is not something new that we've just woken up to. This was a rabbi had written this in 54. I'll just read a couple, okay? I will protect and defend my neighbor and my neighbor's children, our children, against the ravages of racial or religious bigotry. I will challenge the philosophy of racial superiority by whosoever it may be proclaimed, whether they be kings, dictators, or demagogues. I will not be misled by the lying propaganda of those who seek to set race against race or nation against nation. This is not new. These were people who saw this in the South, if you can imagine. They actually, the KKK had burned a cross in the lawn here. So this has been going on for far too long. So, sorry, it's the Q&A.
Yes, so we're gonna open up the chat to everyone now. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. We'll stay on for as long as you want to have discussion, or if you have any topics or questions that you have about the petition or the group that was formed, or any thoughts or ideas. Love to hear them. Okay, I think we have a question in the chat from Alana. You could just type it in the chat. So our first question was about RiverDell hiring practices and what RiverDell is doing to be more inclusive. So I know, Liz, in your discussions with the Board of Ed, I would just see if you and the group have had any discussions about that recently, or if you've included that in your discussions as a group.
We definitely talked about the hiring practices. Unfortunately, we don't really have any back and forth with the Board of Eds right now. I think this is something that we would love to talk about down the line. Having a discussion about maybe understanding sensitivities and understanding, what somebody would do in certain situations, and having more of kind of a discussion with new hires about, what would you do in this situation? How would you act in this situation is really important. It's something I think that we should introduce. And I think it's definitely something I'd like to see us discuss with the Board of Ed down the line, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to your point, definitely more discussion will be coming. There's a question from Bruce. Why were the proposals not presented to the board, and how can we encourage our elected leaders to be more active in this work? I think this goes back to you again, Liz, but I think first and foremost, I think a lot of the conversation has been around COVID and the reopening of the schools right now, but that doesn't mean that we're not continuing with this. I think all of us coming together, we want to make sure that these changes are enacted. And so, to Liz's point, and she could provide more context, the next Board of Ed meeting, we're gonna try again.
Yeah, for sure. The only reason we hadn't presented it at the last few, just because we wanted to see where the petition was how many people were gonna sign it. We wanted to kind of get, as many people to sign it as possible before we presented it. We did email all of our ideas to the board, to superintendents, to the principals. If you go to the change.org position, there's a link at the bottom. It will show what we've proposed to them, and we did send them that. We wanted to see who would respond back. If they would respond back with, we would like to talk about it more, et cetera, et cetera. And so far we really haven't heard anything. So now that's when we're gonna take it to the Board of Ed and have a discussion that way. Kind of really the only option at this point is to go and speak to them face to face. So yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, got a few great comments. Thank you to everyone, especially the organizers. Peace, love, and knowledge of how to spread unity among all races will go a long way. Agreed.
I actually have a bit of an answer to the previous question.
Oh, yes.
So Isabella and I had met with Mr. Fletcher in order to bring up our proposal of the 3 goals, and he had told us that he would bring it up at the board meeting, and so we had attended the virtual meeting and nothing was said about it. So we sent him a follow-up email to which he responded with what Isabella had said about how he sees the solution as being having a section of the clubs based on citizenship. However, we're very frustrated with that response, obviously. And so I know that Isabella and I also hope to present our threefold plan to the board at the next meeting.
And I think with that, that's a good point, I guess. So is there a Zoom that you were joining with?
We had originally met with him in person to bring up all of our ideas to him and get a hold of and get like an idea of where his head was at with everything, because we wanted to be basic and have everything planned out for him. But so then the board meeting was over Zoom, and so we sat through it, and of course it was mostly about COVID, but towards the end, one of the board members had brought up this rally, and we were hoping that he could have responded to that, bringing up maybe the fact that we had even approached him about it, but he was kind of really quiet about it, which was very disappointing. And so we emailed him about that, and he was kind of dismissive in his response, so we were also disappointed about that.
Okay. We had another idea here to have future education on why our town is so predominantly white and what structures contributed to that. I think that's really interesting idea, something we can continue to talk. I think there was a follow-up question about how we're going to continue this discussion, and I think to that point, we are interested in combining forces between the group that organized this, Liz and her group with the petition, Felicita and Isabella with the Board of Ed meetings, and continuing to have meetings together going forward. We have a Gmail account that's up here, so please email us if you're interested in joining. We're probably going to start, we were having meetings, I think on Tuesdays at 7:30. We'll reconfirm that about date and time going forward, but yes, definitely want to continue the momentum and continue having conversations. So if you're interested, definitely email us at the riverdellblm@gmail.com. Okay. If you have questions, somebody asked if we're allowing members to speak on here. We'd prefer to just keep it in the chat and we can unmute later, but if you have questions, I'll just continue to go through each of them one by one. How do we continue to this discussion? Got that one. Why was this moved online? So this was moved online due to the uptick in COVID cases that we're recently seeing in the community in Oradell and River Edge. So to be safe, wanted to make sure that we had it through Zoom. We are planning a future in-person event, hopefully in September. We just wanted to be cognizant of what's going on right now in our community and just do it through Zoom. Someone mentioned that they received a response from Mr. Fletcher and they have some thoughts on what we should be doing moving forward. So if you can email us at RiverDell BLM, I think that's something we can definitely discuss in our next meeting and have actionable steps to take moving forward. Where can we find the petition? Liz, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, the petition is in the chat now. I can repost it on the Facebook and the Instagram if you want to take a look at either of those, or you can email us at our email and I will just send it your way. So.
And I think Nicole actually put it in the chat. So if you guys want to grab it, thank you, Nicole. Okay, and yes, echoing sentiments about thank you to all the speakers and students and Drs. Williams and Nowotny, amazing conversation. Karen brought up an opportunity for a real school climate survey to better understand across the communities everyone just their feelings on the school climates in today's environment. So I think that's a great idea, something we should definitely consider going forward. A lot of thank yous to the speakers, keeping up the momentum. Great. I think that was all of the questions, but yeah, just to reiterate, we have a lot of action items here. I know Maylin, if you wanted to jump in.
Sure. Hi guys. So this is our call to action. So I am not an alumni, but I am a parent, and I think that we're all in the same mindset that this cannot continue to go on into our community. So we need the stakeholders. It's easy for Mr. Fletcher to ignore alumni because they don't have children in the actual school system. I would love the alumni to inspire current students so that we can actually organize events for the students and work together. I think we have some amazing suggestions in the chat as to what we could do, but we need your help. It can't be the 10 of us coming together every Tuesday and just the alumni. Like we would like you, the community, to actually help us. So if you are interested, or if you know any resources that we can use, that we can basically push forward to one, change the culture, because I think that is not acceptable, and also to, on a longer track, to change the curriculum, and that could take years, and we just can't give up. It's not just one event thing. So please email us if you're interested in being part of our group. If you're not, please sign the petition. There's other ways that you can contribute. We understand that not everyone can make that commitment, or if you just have any ideas as to how we can move forward as a community. That's all I'm going to say for now.
And I think there were just a couple more questions. If Drs. Williams and Nowotny have any reading suggestions, maybe that we can get those from you guys as a follow-up. I know the new Jim Crow was mentioned, so definitely on my list as well. But yeah, I think that would be great. I know Dr. Williams mentioned one as well. I think it was Monique Scott was the author. So if you guys are willing to share any recommendations, that would be great.
We also did something like that on the Instagram a couple days ago. We had people send us their recommendations, so I can post that list to Facebook here for some people to see.
Okay,
So,
great. And I think there was another question. Let me see. Okay, Dr. Nowotny said he could send some through to the organizers. How can we engage local politicians to help Mr. Fletcher acknowledge racism in our schools? It's a great question. I think amongst all of us, we've been reaching out to different individuals. I think now that we're organizing kind of as a group, that's also going to help us be able to reach out as a grassroots organization to some local politicians. So apologies that we don't have all the answers just yet, but I think that that can be a talking point for our next meeting for sure. Oh, okay. There is a question for Dr. Williams. Do you have any thoughts on the studies that show that negative behavior by teachers towards Black children has a direct impact on test scores? I don't know. Oh, he's unable to unmute. Lori, can you unmute Dr. Williams?
Is she here?
I'm sorry.
There you go.
Yes, yes, yes. To your question, yes, this is widely known in the academic literature around tested in particular, and it's also connected to the school to prison pipeline and discipline. So yeah, you kind of answered your question, but yes, the negative behavior towards Black children, and this can be by way of discipline, sending them to the office or whatever have you, not giving them proper feedback on homework. So there's some studies, qualitative studies as well, that have shown that if the child perceived that the teacher doesn't give them enough time as compared to some of their peers in the classroom, this might have a negative effect to where it sort of had this devaluing self-worth effect on a child that might translate into them sort of giving up. This is why I noted Monique's book, Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls. Victor Rios has also done some work around this, what he called a youth industrialization complex, and how, well, he talks more broadly about adult authority figures just more broadly, so like parents, police officers, and so forth. But there is a partition within the book in which he focuses on the school. So looking at some of his work, but just to put it more succinctly, yes, the essence of your question is true. It is true. But I always like to say that the school as a site of socialization and immense social consequence is so multifaceted, right? That it's just so many layers to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, okay, Nikki just posted the hyperlink for the Facebook page. And Jennifer was asking about organizing a teach-in in the community where she teaches in Rockland, and how she can help. I would definitely encourage you to join our next meeting and email. Thank you, Mylan, for adding the email address. We are definitely willing to help and definitely want to continue the conversations. Thank you. I guess just last, I have a question for Dr. Williams. I'm just curious if you've, in recent months, seen any communities that you've been involved in, any actions that they've been taking that you've been really impressed with or feel that is going to contribute to change?
Yes. So Patterson in particular, some stuff in Jersey City, and really even from afar, witnessing from afar or whatnot. And I, you know, and if I were to just focus on what you all are doing right now, I think this is a very good first step. Just raising awareness around a issue. You know, now I feel like I'm in my Perspectives on Justice Studies course and teaching about how do we identify a social problem, right? And the first step is, well, raising awareness around it, right? So that people are made aware of it, because it seems like the issue here is that, well, many people and many good people, right, perhaps just are not aware of it. You know, and so once people become aware of it, you can now sort of gather all of these individuals together to put additional pressure on very important people, such that change can come about. And that's what I've begun to see in other municipalities. I've been to Bloomingdale, I've been to Wayne, I've been invited like all over northern New Jersey to give talks in the aftermath of all of this. And in each of those locations, change is happening. And it may be happening piecemeal, right, in piecemeal fashion, but it's happening through certain policy changes or procedures and such. And the school has been like one of the number one topics in each of those discussions, outside of criminal justice, of course. So, but I think what you guys are doing is an important first step, you know, bringing the platform and the conversation to the community to raise consciousness around it.
Great, thank you. Someone is asking if you'd come to Suffern, Jennifer Crespo. So I think you are requested to come more places. So.
Oh, I haven't been up there yet. No. Oh, but would I? Oh yeah.
Would you?
Oh yeah.
Oh, and if Lori,
and I can share my email. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And yes, this is being recorded. So once we have that file readily available, I think Karen will probably post on the Facebook group, and maybe that's how we'll share it out to everyone.
Not books being mentioned.
Yeah, there's a lot of books in the chat,
Yeah.
so definitely feel free to go through the chat. I think some of How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Kendi, who's now starting a a new program at Boston University, which is
Yes.
where I'm an alum from. So I've been paying close attention to that. He's doing a lot of great work there. So I'm going to keep a close eye on what he's doing. Why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria, by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. Okay, to the students, besides changing the curriculum and adding POC authors and artists, what can white teachers do to help you feel safe and included in the community? Obviously standing up to obvious racism and jokes, etc., but what would you like to see from teachers? That's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
I think,
oh, yeah, go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think it's really important to actively hold conversations and to incorporate and normalize watching documentaries like 13th. Like, let's say if there's a substitute teacher for the day, and instead of just having the kids do nothing, you can put on 13th, or just adding little aspects and trying to like make the curriculum more diverse, I think would be really important.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I think having like an open door policy for students, if they ever feel uncomfortable, if they ever feel like something happened to them and they don't feel like they want to tell their friends, they don't want to tell their parents, they have an open door policy with your students. You come in, you know, they can talk it out, work it out, have a conversation, an open conversation. I think the key is openness to talk about certain situations. I think a lot of times teachers want to like shush it away because they're uncomfortable, but they don't know what to say. But I think it's important that we have these conversations, even if you might, you know, not know the right thing to say, finding, you know, something, just discussion, I think is really important, you know, give students an opportunity to feel like they have a voice to say what's on their mind. That's what I think we should definitely encourage teachers to do, for sure.
Definitely. A lot of great resources in this chat, so I'm going to try to actively type things down. And I know Liz had mentioned she had collected some resources on the Instagram, so we'll try to get all that collected to share out. People are mentioning United Shades of America on CNN. Eyes on the Prize is a great documentary series on the civil rights movement. I know that the John Lewis documentary, Good Trouble, just came out, so a lot of really great resources. How are you ensuring diverse folks help build the recommendations for schools? That's a great question.
I'm sorry, can you just read it? You say it again for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it just was, how are you ensuring diverse people help build the recommendations that we're going to be asking for in the schools?
I mean, we're open to anybody's, if they have a recommendation that they think is important to them. Of course, we want to have a diverse amount of people giving recommendations. We want to have, you know, from all perspectives, all sides. You know, it's a filter process. If we see a lot of the same stuff go through, we'll try to pick out things that we think haven't been mentioned a lot. In terms of history and arts and music, we lean on a lot of people who we know who are experts in that field. So we have somebody who is a trained opera singer who suggested that we look into more diverse music to teach in schools. So we're looking into that, things that he recommends, things that the people he works with closely recommend, stuff like that. So it's not just, you know, we're getting 4 or 5 of the same people sources. We're really doing the work to see, you know, what other people recommend, experts in other fields, stuff like that. So we are definitely taking our time building lists and stuff like that for them.
Southern Poverty Law School was also mentioned for resources. Mylin was also mentioning professional development for teachers, which is a big piece of what we're asking for from the Board of Ed, so that they're equipped to handle these types of conversations, and educating teachers on how to teach that people of color have been part of American history since 1492. Very good point, Mylin. Teaching Tolerance is a great resource, and New Jersey Education Association posts a Black Lives at School curriculum. So all great resources. Well, great. I think that looks like it was all the questions that we had. There's some more suggestions coming through. Black is King by Beyonce. Yes, that's on my list for this weekend. So excited that that came out. I think that's going to be great for so many little Black boys and girls to see that. It's going to be great. And thank you, everyone. Thanks again for joining. Definitely more to come. So appreciate everyone joining and having an active conversation about all this.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.